News of the accident reached Earth in less than 6 hours. President Alan Rodriguez was eating dinner with his family when his emergency phone rang. The call that came changed everything for the entire human race. "Mr. President," the voice on. The phone was shaky. "We have a situation at Nexus Prime. The Liberty crashed into the Memorial Wing. They destroyed artifacts from 12 different alien species." Alan put down his fork and walked to his private office. "How bad is it?" "Sir, it's the worst possible scenario. The Zephyrians are calling it an act of war. The Moffic Collective is saying we have offended their gods. The Kretar delegation is packing to leave. Every major news network in the galaxy is calling us destroyers and savages." Within 2 hours, the Global Council was meeting in emergency session. The big conference room in Geneva was filled with worried faces. Admiral Karen Stone sat at the long table with her military advisors. Secretary of Science Dr. Richard Hayes was there with his computers and data tablets. Foreign Minister Lisa Grant looked tired and stressed. "Let's see the damage report," President Rodriguez said. The big screen at the front of the room showed pictures from Nexus Prime. The images were terrible. Broken crystal pieces floated in space. Ancient statues were smashed beyond repair. Scrolls that had survived for millions of years were torn and scattered. Dr. Richard Hayes read from his tablet. The Zephyrian crown jewels were completely destroyed. These were not just valuable gems. They were symbols of their empire that ruled half the galaxy 2 million years ago. The Mothak sacred crystals contained religious writings that took their monks 10,000 years to create, and the Kretar ancestor bones belonged to their most honored war heroes from ancient times. Admiral Stone leaned forward. "What's the military situation? Are we looking at possible attacks on Earth?" "The Zephyrians have 3 battle fleets," reported Colonel Jim Brady. "The Mothak have ships that can make stars go dark. The Kretar are fewer in number, but their weapons are older and more powerful than anything we've seen." President Rodriguez felt the weight of 6 billion human lives on his shoulders. "What are our options?" "We could try to defend ourselves," Admiral Stone said. "Pull back all our ships and prepare Earth's defenses." "That would prove to them that we're as violent as they think," Foreign Minister Grant replied. "It would make everything worse." Dr. Hayes looked up from his tablet. "I'm getting reports from our cultural experts. This isn't just about the physical artifacts. Each species has different ideas about honor, shame, and making things right. The Zephyrians believe in something called generational responsibility. If we dishonor them, our children and grandchildren will also be dishonored. The Mothak think we have disturbed the spiritual balance of the universe. The Kretar see this as a blood debt that can only be paid with blood." The room was quiet for a long moment. Everyone understood how serious this was. That's when the communication screen lit up. Ambassador Carter's face appeared from Nexus Prime. She looked tired but determined. "Mr. President, I need to speak with the Council." "Helen, what's the situation there?" President Rodriguez asked. "We're essentially prisoners on the station. The aliens won't let us leave, but they also haven't hurt us. Captain Morrison and his crew are safe for now. But I'm hearing things that worry me. Some species are talking about sending fleets to Earth. Others want to ban humans from ever leaving our solar system again." Admiral Stone spoke up. "Ambassador, we're considering military options. We could send ships to get you out of there." Helen shook her head firmly. "Admiral, that would be the worst thing we could do. These species have been fighting wars for millions of years. They have weapons that could destroy our entire fleet without trying hard. But I have a different idea." Dr. Hayes leaned toward the screen. "What are you thinking, Helen?" "We don't fight this. We don't defend it. We don't try to minimize it or explain it away. We do something that apparently no species in galactic history has ever done properly." "Which is?" President Rodriguez asked. "We take full responsibility. We admit we were wrong. And we make it right in a way that exceeds the damage we caused." The room was silent. Admiral Stone looked confused. Ambassador, with respect, how do you make right something that can't be replaced? Those artifacts were millions of years old. Helen's eyes were bright with an idea that was forming. Dr. Hayes, I need you to contact every cultural expert we have. I need Maria Santos, our best linguist. I need Ben Clark, our anthropologist. I need everyone who knows anything about alien cultures. What exactly are you planning? Foreign Minister, Grant asked. I'm going to create something that has never existed before, Helen said. An apology that works for all 12 species at the same time. But it's not just going to be words. We're going to offer something that no species has ever offered before. Dr. Hayes was already making notes. Helen, each species has completely different ideas about apologies and making amends. The Zephyrians need formal recognition of shame. The Mothak need spiritual cleansing. The Kretar need blood payment. How can we satisfy all of them? I don't know yet, Helen admitted. But I'm going to find out. Dr. Hayes, I need you to research every cultural tradition these species have about forgiveness, honor, and making things right. Maria, I need you to learn how to say, I'm sorry, in ways that each species will understand. Ben, I need you to figure out what each culture values most. President Rodriguez looked around the room. This is a big risk, Helen. If your apology doesn't work, we might make things even worse. Mr. President, things can't get much worse than they already are, Helen replied. Right now, half the galaxy wants to destroy us and the other half wants to ignore us forever. But I've been watching the alien delegates here on the station. They're not just angry. Some of them seem hurt, really hurt, like we damaged something that was part of their souls. Dr. Hayes nodded slowly. That actually makes sense. These weren't just museum pieces. They were connections to their ancestors, their gods, their history. Exactly, Helen said. So we need to apologize not just for breaking their things, but for not understanding why those things mattered. And then we need to prove that we do understand. Admiral Stone still looked doubtful. And how do we prove that? Helen was quiet for a moment, thinking. We give them something of ours that matters just as much to us as those artifacts mattered to them. Foreign Minister Grant leaned forward. What do you mean? I mean we open our cultural vaults. We share our most precious human artifacts with them. We show them that we understand the value of history and culture by trusting them with ours. The room was completely silent as everyone thought about what that would mean. Dr. Hayes spoke first. Helen, that's never been done before. No species has ever shared their most sacred artifacts with other species, which is exactly why it might work, Helen replied. We need to do something that shows we're different, something that proves we're not just destroyers, but preservers and sharers. President Rodriguez made his decision. Helen, you have whatever resources you need. Dr. Hayes, Maria, Ben, everyone she mentioned. This is now our top priority. How much time do we have? Helen asked. The Galactic News is saying that the major species will vote in 3 days on whether to take action against Earth, Dr. Hayes reported. 3 days to save humanity's future, Helen said quietly. We better get started. The screen went dark. Around the table, the most powerful people on Earth sat in silence, knowing that everything now depended on whether one woman could create a miracle of diplomacy. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the front window of his ship, looking at the huge space station ahead. The UES Liberty was getting closer to Nexus Prime, the biggest meeting place in the galaxy. Today was the most important day in human history. After 50 years of talking with aliens, humans finally got invited to join the big trade group that controlled business across the stars. Jake felt nervous but excited. Behind him, his crew worked at their stations. Pete Williams sat at the communication desk, talking to the space station. Lucy Davis was in the engine room making sure everything worked right, and in her special room, Ambassador Helen Carter was reading her notes one more time. She was the smartest person Earth had for talking to aliens. The space station was amazing to look at. It was bigger than any city on Earth. Ships from hundreds of different worlds were docked around it. Jake could see the long, thin ships of the Zephyrians with their silver hulls that looked like mirrors. The round, glowing ships of the Mothak Collective pulsed with soft blue light. The dark, angular vessels of the Kretar looked like giant metal bugs floating in space. "Captain, the station is asking us to dock at Port 17, Pete said from his station. "They want us to follow the yellow guide lights," Jake nodded. "Lucy, how are our engines doing?" Lucy's voice came through the speaker from the engine room. "Everything looks good, Captain. Navigation computer is working fine. We should have a smooth docking." Ambassador Carter walked onto the main deck. She was a tall woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She had spent years learning about alien cultures. "Captain Morrison, how long until we dock?" "About 15 minutes, Ambassador," Jake replied. "Are you ready for this?" Helen smiled. "As ready as anyone can be for something this big. Do you know that some of the species meeting today have been trading for millions of years? And here we are, the new kids, trying to prove we belong." Jake understood. Humans were still very new to space travel compared to other species. The Zephyrians had built their first starships when humans were still learning to make fire. The Mothak had been exploring the galaxy when Earth was covered in ice. The Kretar were so old that nobody knew exactly when they started traveling between stars. "Navigation computer is locked onto the docking port," Pete announced. "Beginning final approach." The Liberty moved slowly toward the space station. Jake watched as they got closer to the docking port. The station was even more impressive up close. He could see aliens walking around behind the windows. Some looked like tall, thin humans with blue skin. Others were completely different, like living clouds or creatures made of crystal. 10 minutes to docking," Lucy reported. "All systems normal." Ambassador Carter stood next to Jake, watching the station grow larger. "Captain, I want you to know how important this is. If we can join the Galactic Trade Consortium, Earth will have access to technology that could solve our energy problems, help us cure diseases, and open up the entire galaxy for exploration." "And if we fail?" Jake asked. "Then we might be stuck in our little corner of space for a very long time," Helen said quietly. The Liberty continued its approach. The docking port was now very close. Jake could see the mechanical arms that would grab their ship and pull it into place. Everything was going exactly as planned. 5 minutes to docking, Pete said. "Station control confirms we are cleared for approach." That was when something went wrong. "Captain!" Lucy's voice came through the speaker, sounding worried. "I'm getting strange readings from the navigation computer. Something's not right." Jake felt his stomach drop. "What kind of readings?" "The computer is showing our position wrong. It thinks we're farther away than we actually are, and it's still accelerating us toward the station." Jake looked out the window. They were moving too fast. Much too fast. "Pete, contact the station. Tell them we have a problem." Pete's fingers flew over his controls. "Station control, this is UES Liberty. We have a navigation malfunction. Please advise." The response came back quickly, but Jake could hear worry in the alien voice. "Liberty, you are approaching too fast. Reduce speed immediately." "Lucy, can you stop the engines?" Jake called out. "I'm trying, Captain, but the computer won't respond. It's like something is overriding my commands." Ambassador Carter grabbed onto a rail as the ship shook slightly. "Captain, what's happening?" "We're in trouble," Jake said honestly. He could see the docking port getting bigger and bigger in the window. They were going to hit the station, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "Emergency protocol!" Jake shouted. "Everyone hold on!" The Liberty crashed into Nexus Prime with a terrible sound of metal hitting metal, but it was much worse than just a simple crash. Instead of hitting the empty docking port, the ship smashed directly into a different part of the station. Jake watched in horror as their ship tore through the wall of what looked like a museum. Alarms started ringing everywhere. Emergency lights flashed red and yellow. Through the broken wall, Jake could see pieces of what looked like art and artifacts floating in space. Beautiful crystals that had been glowing with soft light were now dark and broken. Statues that looked like they were carved from rare stones were smashed into pieces. Ancient books or scrolls were scattered and torn. "Oh no," Ambassador Carter whispered. "Do you know what we just hit?" Jake shook his head, but he could tell from her voice that it was something very bad. "That was the memorial wing," Helen said, her face turning pale. "It holds the most sacred artifacts from 12 different species. Some of those items were millions of years old. They were priceless pieces of history and culture. Pete's communication station started making noise as messages came in from the space station. His face went white as he listened. "Captain, the station is in emergency lockdown. They're saying we destroyed the Zephyrian crown jewels, the Mothak sacred crystals, and the Kretar ancestor bones." Jake felt sick. This was not just an accident. This was a disaster that could destroy any chance of humans ever being accepted by the galactic community. "Ambassador," Jake said quietly, "what do we do now?" Helen Carter looked at the destruction through the window. Pieces of alien artifacts were still floating in space around their ship. She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. "Now," she said, "we face the consequences of what we've done. And we hope that somehow we can find a way to make this right." Outside, Jake could see alien security ships surrounding the Liberty. The most important day in human history had just become the worst day in human history, and there was no way to take it back. After 6 hours of intense discussions, Ambassador Sullivan called for a break. The human delegation needed time to review everything they had learned and develop their mediation strategy. They gathered in a small conference room that the station had provided for private discussions. What they did not know was that 3 different intelligence services had managed to place listening devices in the room. The Corvan Military Intelligence, the Zephyrian Diplomatic Corps, and the Galactic Council's Security Division all wanted to know what the humans were really planning. Captain Morrison sat down heavily in his chair and rubbed his temples. "This is more complicated than I thought. Both sides have dug themselves into positions they can't abandon without looking weak. The psychological factors are fascinating," Dr. Patterson said, reviewing her notes. "The Zephyrians see any compromise as betraying their peaceful principles. The Corvans view any retreat as dishonor. We need to find a way to let both sides win." Commander Walsh spread tactical displays across the table. "The military situation is the key. As long as both fleets are sitting out there ready to fight, nobody can back down. We need to neutralize that threat first." In the Corvan Intelligence Center aboard the Bloodclaw, 3 officers listened to the intercepted conversation with growing alarm. The humans were talking about neutralizing military threats. That sounded like they were planning to attack both fleets. "We need to eliminate the psychological barriers," Patterson continued. "Target the core fears that keep both sides from negotiating honestly. Once we remove those obstacles, we can force them into a rational framework." The listening devices translated her words into Corvan military terms. Eliminate barriers, target core positions, force compliance. To Corvan ears, this sounded like a systematic plan for psychological warfare followed by military conquest. Ambassador Sullivan pulled up economic data on her tablet. "The real issue is economic control. Both sides want exclusive access to those trade routes. We need to take out the competitive elements and replace them with cooperative structures." "Surgical removal of the profit motive," Walsh agreed. "If we can capture their economic interests and redirect them toward mutual benefit, we eliminate the source of conflict." The Zephyrian Intelligence Service was recording every word. "Take out competitive elements. Surgical removal. Capture economic interests." The humans were discussing economic warfare with the same casual efficiency they brought to military analysis. Dr. Patterson stood up and began pacing. We should pursue an aggressive strategy of psychological integration. Break down the cultural barriers that prevent cooperation. Systematically destroy the US versus them mentality that keeps this conflict alive. How do we implement that? Morrison asked. We target the leadership structures, Patterson replied. Identify the key individuals who maintain resistance to peace. Isolate them from their support networks. Apply pressure until they accept our framework. The Galactic Council's security chief nearly dropped his listening device. The humans were planning to target galactic leaders for isolation and pressure. This sounded like a plan for political assassination and regime change. Commander Walsh brought up a new tactical display. The key is speed and overwhelming force. If we move too slowly, they'll have time to organize resistance. We need to hit multiple pressure points simultaneously until their defenses collapse. Agreed, Sullivan said. We launch a coordinated assault on every aspect of the problem. Military, economic, psychological, and political. Total warfare across all fronts until they surrender to the inevitable. Morrison nodded grimly. How long do you think it will take? With proper execution, we could have complete victory within 72 hours, Walsh estimated. Both sides will be too demoralized to continue fighting. The intelligence services listening to this conversation reached the same terrifying conclusion. The humans had just outlined a comprehensive plan for the complete conquest of two interstellar civilizations. They intended to launch simultaneous attacks on military, economic, and political targets until both species surrendered unconditionally. What made it worse was the casual competence with which they discussed such an enormous undertaking. They were not talking about conquering a single planet or star system. They were planning to subjugate two entire galactic powers, and they seemed confident they could do it in 3 days. The human delegation spent another hour refining their strategy. They discussed implementation timelines, resource allocation, and contingency planning. Every word was recorded and analyzed by increasingly panicked intelligence officers. Dr. Patterson made detailed notes about psychological pressure points. We need to understand their cultural vulnerabilities. What fears keep them awake at night? What hopes drive their decision-making? Once we map their emotional landscape, we can manipulate it at will. The economic analysis is just as important, Sullivan added. We need to identify every source of revenue, every trade dependency, every financial vulnerability. When we move, we need to control their entire economic ecosystem. Commander Walsh pulled up fleet disposition charts. The military component requires precise timing. We need to know the location of every ship, every weapons platform, every defensive installation. One coordinated strike, and their entire defensive capability becomes worthless. The three intelligence services were frantically updating their threat assessments. The humans had demonstrated detailed knowledge of both civilizations' military capabilities, economic structures, and psychological weaknesses. This level of intelligence gathering suggested months or years of preparation. But Earth had only been in contact with the galaxy for 18 months. How had they gathered so much information so quickly? Did they have intelligence networks that no one had detected? Were there human spies throughout galactic civilization? Captain Morrison stood up and stretched. All right, let's put this together into a comprehensive proposal, something both sides can understand and accept. Remember, we need to make it look like they're choosing cooperation voluntarily, Patterson said. The psychological impact is crucial. They need to believe they're making rational decisions based on their own interests. Even though we're actually controlling every aspect of their decision-making process, Walsh added with what sounded like grim satisfaction. Sullivan began drafting their presentation. I'll structure it as a series of logical steps that lead inevitably to our desired outcome. By the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late to resist. The listening. Devices captured every word as the humans finalized their plan for galactic domination. Their strategy was terrifyingly comprehensive, covering every possible angle of attack and every potential source of resistance. What made it even more frightening was their absolute confidence in success. They were not hoping to conquer two galactic civilizations. They were planning how to manage the aftermath of their inevitable victory. Emergency communications flashed between ships as the intelligence services shared their discoveries. The humans were not mediators. They were conquerors who had used the peace talks to gather intelligence and plan their attack. The evidence was overwhelming. They had systematically analyzed military capabilities, identified psychological weaknesses, mapped economic vulnerabilities, and planned coordinated strikes against all resistance. Now they were preparing to present their ultimatum disguised as a peace proposal. As the human delegation prepared to return to the assembly hall, their intercepted conversation had already changed the galaxy's understanding of Earth's intentions. What had started as a simple mediation request had become the opening move in humanity's bid for galactic conquest. Ambassador Velox received the intelligence report in his private chambers. His translucent skin turned pale with fear as he read the transcript of the human planning session. They intended to eliminate all resistance and force both civilizations into surrender within 72 hours. General Craxon read the same report aboard his flagship. His scaled hands clenched into fists as he realized the scope of the human threat. These creatures had analyzed Corvan military capabilities with terrifying accuracy. They knew exactly where to strike for maximum effect. Both leaders reached the same conclusion independently. The humans had not come to Concordia Station to mediate a peace agreement. They had come to demonstrate their power and deliver terms for surrender. The peace talks were just a cover for the most audacious conquest attempt in galactic history. As the human delegation walked back toward the assembly hall, they had no idea that their private strategy session had been interpreted as a declaration of war against half the galaxy. Their systematic approach to problem-solving had convinced everyone that Earth was planning the conquest of known space. What they thought was careful preparation for diplomatic mediation looked like reconnaissance for the largest military operation anyone had ever attempted. Their confidence in finding a solution appeared to be certainty of victory through overwhelming force. The galaxy was about to learn just how terrifying human competence could be when applied to interstellar politics. The assembly hall fell silent as Ambassador Sullivan stepped up to the central podium. 200 alien beings watched her every move, their various forms of sensory organs focused on the small human figure. Sullivan had given hundreds of speeches in her career, but never to an audience this large or this diverse. She smiled warmly at the assembled delegates, showing her teeth in what humans considered a friendly expression. The effect on the alien audience was immediate and unsettling. Across the hall, herbivorous species instinctively moved back in their seats. Predator species recognized a fellow hunter's display of confidence. "Thank you all for coming to these important peace talks," Sullivan began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's translation systems. "Earth is honored to help mediate this dispute between the Zephyrian Commonwealth and the Corvan Empire." Ambassador Velox felt his translucent skin darken with stress hormones. The human's smile looked exactly like the threat displays used by the carnivorous species on his home world. Was this creature planning to devour him if the negotiations failed? General Craxon's scaled hands tightened on his ceremonial sword. In Corvan culture, showing one's teeth was a challenge to single combat. This human female was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid to challenge a Corvan warrior in front of witnesses. Sullivan continued her opening remarks, completely unaware of the panic she was causing. "We believe that every conflict has a solution if we approach it with open minds and honest communication. Sometimes an outside perspective can help find common ground that both sides can accept." Dr. Patterson took notes on her tablet as she watched the body language of both delegations. The Zephyrians were showing clear signs of fear, while the Corvins appeared to be preparing for battle. This was not the typical reaction to a diplomatic opening statement. "I would like to begin by asking both sides to explain their positions in detail," Patterson said, standing up from her seat. Her voice was professional and clinical, the tone she used when interviewing patients back on Earth. To the alien delegates, her request sounded like an interrogation. Her clinical detachment reminded several species of the psychological warfare specialists they had encountered during past conflicts. The way she studied their reactions while taking notes suggested she was gathering intelligence rather than seeking understanding. Ambassador Velox spoke first, his musical voice trembling slightly. "The Corvin Empire has been expanding into neutral space for the past 3 years. They claim mining rights on planets that have belonged to no one for centuries. When our merchant ships attempt to travel through these areas, they are attacked, without warning." Patterson nodded and made more notes. "Attacked how? What types of weapons were used? How many casualties?" The questions came rapid fire, each one more specific than the last. Patterson was simply trying to understand the facts of the situation, but her systematic approach to gathering information looked like military intelligence gathering to the watching aliens. General Craxon answered reluctantly. "We defended our legitimate territorial claims against spy ships disguised as traitors. No Corvin warrior attacks unarmed civilians without provocation." "Spy ships?" Patterson asked, leaning forward with interest. "What evidence do you have of espionage activities?" Commander Walsh pulled out his tablet and began accessing the preliminary intelligence reports they had received from the Galactic Council. "According to the data we reviewed, there have been 17 incidents in the past 6 months. Can you provide the tactical details of each engagement?" The word tactical sent ripples of unease through the assembly. Walsh was asking for standard military information that any competent mediator would need to understand the scope of the conflict. But his casual use of military terminology suggested that humans thought about these incidents in terms of warfare rather than diplomacy. "I need to understand the strategic importance of the disputed territories," Walsh continued, bringing up a star chart on the room's main display. "These systems control access to 3 major trade routes and contain significant mineral deposits." His finger traced lines between star systems, identifying choke points and supply routes with the practiced eye of a military strategist. To the alien observers, it looked like he was planning an invasion rather than trying to understand a trade dispute. Captain Morrison noticed that the atmosphere in the room was becoming tense. He decided to lighten the mood with some humor, a technique that worked well in human diplomatic situations. "Well, at least nobody's shooting at each other today," he said with a grin. "That's what I call progress. Back home, we have a saying about bringing people together. Sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet." The translation systems struggled with the human idiom. In several alien languages, Morrison's words came out as threats about breaking enemies and consuming their remains. His casual reference to violence as a solution to diplomatic problems confirmed what many delegates were already thinking. Dr. Patterson stood up again, her tablet full of notes. "I think we need to look at the psychological roots of this conflict. Both species have fundamentally different approaches to territorial acquisition and resource management." She began to pace as she spoke, a habit that helped her think but made her look like a predator stalking prey to several species in the audience. "The Zephyrians value cooperation and shared resources," she continued. "The Corvins value strength and individual achievement. These are not necessarily incompatible worldviews, but they require careful management to coexist." Her analysis was accurate and insightful, but her clinical language made it sound like she was discussing how to manage livestock rather than sentient beings. Several delegates whispered among themselves about the humans' disturbing approach to interspecies psychology. Ambassador Sullivan tried to steer the conversation back to practical matters. "Perhaps we should focus on specific issues that both sides can agree to address." What would you consider an acceptable compromise on the mining rights question? The question was reasonable, but Sullivan's direct approach bypassed all the careful, diplomatic protocols that usually governed such discussions. She was cutting straight to the heart of the matter in a way that suggested she had no patience for traditional negotiation techniques. Ambassador Velox exchanged a nervous glance with General Craxon. For the first time in 2 years, the two enemies found themselves in agreement about something. These humans were not normal diplomats. Their questions were too specific, their analysis too thorough, and their approach too systematic. Captain. Morrison noticed the growing tension and decided to address it directly. I can see that both sides are feeling stressed about this situation. That's natural when dealing with complex political issues. But I want to assure everyone that Earth has no agenda here beyond helping you find a peaceful solution. His words were meant to be reassuring, but the way he analyzed their emotional states suggested an uncomfortable level of psychological insight. How had he read their stress levels so accurately? What other thoughts could he detect? Commander. Walsh brought up another star chart, this one showing fleet positions and defensive installations. I think it would help if we could arrange for both sides to pull back their military forces during these negotiations. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to reduce the risk of accidental conflict. The suggestion was sensible from a peacekeeping perspective, but Walsh's detailed knowledge of both sides' military positions was alarming. How had humans obtained such accurate intelligence about Corvin and Zephyrian fleet deployments? Dr. Patterson made another note on her tablet. I'm seeing classic territorial dispute patterns here. Both sides have invested significant resources and prestige in their positions. Any resolution will need to allow both parties to maintain face while achieving their core objectives. Her psychological assessment was spot on, but the casual way she discussed manipulating their motivations made several delegates uncomfortable. Were humans naturally gifted at psychological manipulation, or had they been studying galactic species for longer than anyone realized? As the first day of negotiations came to an end, delegates from both sides requested private meetings with their respective leadership. Emergency communications were sent to home worlds and fleet commanders. Intelligence services began reviewing everything they knew about human capabilities and intentions. The humans returned to their quarters on Concordia Station, pleased with what they considered a productive first day. They had gathered comprehensive information about the conflict, identified the key psychological and strategic factors, and begun developing a framework for resolution. What they did not realize was that their systematic approach to problem-solving had convinced half the galaxy that Earth was conducting reconnaissance for a planned invasion. Their casual competence at military analysis and psychological assessment suggested a species that approached diplomacy as just another form of warfare. As the station's lights dimmed for the sleep cycle, aliens throughout Concordia found themselves wondering the same thing. Had the Galactic Council accidentally invited the galaxy's newest apex predator to evaluate their prey? And if so, what did the humans plan to do with all the intelligence they were gathering? Admiral Kale stood alone in his office as the final hour approached. Outside his window, the 3 human ships waited in perfect formation. No movement, no threats, no demands. They simply existed, like monuments to power that no longer needed to be demonstrated. His communication device chimed with incoming messages from across Coalition space. Every planetary governor, every military commander, every civilian leader was asking the same question. What do we do? Dr. Lyra entered without knocking. Her usual calm demeanor had been replaced by something between exhaustion and wonder. Kale, you need to see this. She activated a portable display showing feeds from across the galaxy. On Altair Prime, human. Aid workers were distributing food to families while Coalition warehouses sat empty due to computer malfunctions. On the Krex homeworld, human engineers were repairing power systems that had mysteriously failed the day before. On Vorthak Research Stations, human scientists were sharing advanced technology that made Coalition science look primitive. They're not waiting for our surrender, Dr. Lyra said quietly. They're already governing us. How long? Kale asked. Our intelligence teams estimate human agents have been in leadership positions throughout Coalition space for at least 15 years. Trade advisors, technical consultants, diplomatic attachés, people we trusted and relied on. Admiral Kale felt the weight of complete defeat settling on his shoulders. We never had a choice, did we? No. This war was over before we knew it had begun. With 30 minutes remaining, General Thax called from his flagship. The proud Krex warrior looked older than his years, his battle scars seeming to ache with the knowledge of inevitable surrender. Kale, my weapons officer, just showed me something interesting. The computer viruses that disabled our ships? They've been in our systems since the ships were built. The humans didn't infiltrate our fleet. They helped design it. What do you mean? The technical specifications for our newest warships came from consulting companies that have been working with Coalition shipyards for 20 years. Those companies were human operations. Every ship in my fleet was built with human backdoors already installed. Dr. Lyra checked her own records. The same pattern everywhere. Our most advanced medical equipment includes human-designed components. Our communication networks run on protocols developed by human technicians. Our food distribution systems use logistics software created by human programmers. They didn't conquer our civilization, Admiral Kyle realized. They built it. Director Knox appeared on the communication screen from his research facility. His pale face showed a mixture of scientific fascination and existential dread. I've been analyzing the technology they revealed during their demonstration. Their ships don't just use advanced physics. They use principles we haven't discovered yet. How far ahead of us are they? Dr. Lyra asked. Conservative estimate? 500 years. Realistic estimate? We may never catch up. They're not just more advanced. They think about technology in ways we haven't imagined. Minister Zara joined the conversation from the emergency government bunker on Altair Prime. The civilian response reports are coming in. Approval ratings for human management are above 80% on every world they've taken control of. Our own people prefer them to us, General Thax said bitterly. Can you blame them? Minister A. Zara replied. Food deliveries that were delayed for weeks under coalition management are running perfectly under human oversight. Power grids that suffered regular failures are now completely stable. They've solved problems in days that we couldn't fix in years. With 10 minutes remaining before the deadline, Captain Hayes requested a final communication. Admiral Kale accepted. Knowing this would be the end of coalition independence, Captain Hayes appeared on screen, but she was no longer on her ship. She stood in what looked like a coalition government building, wearing a coalition uniform with human insignia added. Admiral Kale, the deadline has served its purpose. Your people understand their situation. Your leaders recognize the new reality. The question now is how we move forward. What are your terms? Kale asked, though the word terms felt meaningless when speaking to someone who already controlled everything. Integration, not conquest. Your species will maintain their cultures, their traditions, their identity. But governance, military affairs, and technological development will operate under human oversight. General Thax leaned forward. What does that mean for our military forces? Your warriors will serve alongside human forces in a unified galactic defense system. We'll teach you to fight the way we fight. Your people are brave, General Thax. We can make them effective. Minister Zara spoke carefully. And our governments? Your people will choose their local leaders through democratic processes. But those leaders will implement policies developed by human strategic planners. Think of it as advisors with final authority. Director Knox asked the question that had been troubling him most. Why? Why go to all this effort instead of simply destroying us? Captain Hayes smiled, and for the first time since this began, her expression seemed genuinely warm. Director Knox, humans learned long ago that destroyed civilizations provide no value, but guided civilizations can accomplish remarkable things. She gestured to displays behind her showing star charts and development plans. The galaxy is vast and dangerous. There are threats out there that none of our species could face alone. But together, under proper coordination, we can explore further and accomplish more than anyone imagined. You're talking about expansion, Dr. Lyra realized. I'm talking about survival on a galactic scale. Your species developed impressive technologies and social systems during your war years. Under human guidance, those capabilities can be refined and directed toward challenges that actually matter. Admiral Kale found himself asking a question he never expected to voice. What happens to us? To our positions? Our responsibilities? You continue serving your people, Admiral, but now you serve them as part of something larger. Your experience with coalition politics will be valuable as we integrate other species into the new system. Other species? Minister Zara asked. The galaxy is bigger than the 4 species in this room. There are civilizations beyond your borders that will need to be contacted, evaluated, and integrated. Some will be friendly, others will not. Captain Hayes paused, letting that implication settle. Humanity offers protection, guidance, and technological advancement. In return, we expect cooperation, honesty, and commitment to the greater good as we define it. General Thax straightened in his chair. And if future species refuse your offer? Then, they'll learn the same lessons you've learned. That resistance to human authority is not just futile, it's unnecessary. We don't want to destroy anyone, General. We want to improve everyone. Dr. Lyra looked at the data streaming across her displays. Reports showed human-managed systems operating at efficiency levels the Coalition had never achieved. How long have you been planning this? Since we first detected your radio signals 2 centuries ago. Humanity learned early that the galaxy contains both opportunities and threats. We decided to position ourselves to take advantage of the opportunities while eliminating the threats. We were a threat? Admiral Kyle asked. You were chaotic. 4 species fighting endless wars, wasting resources, limiting technological development. Under human management, your people can achieve their full potential. The deadline passed without ceremony. No alarms sounded, no dramatic announcements were made. The transition from coalition independence to human oversight happened as quietly as flipping a switch. Welcome to the Human Galactic Commonwealth, Captain Hayes said. Your real journey begins now. 1 year later, Admiral Kale stood in the same office looking out at the same view. But now, instead of 3 threatening human ships, he saw a bustling spaceport with vessels from dozens of worlds working together. Dr. Lyra entered carrying reports that would have been impossible under the old coalition. Kyle, the new exploration fleet is ready for launch. 15 ships, integrated crews from all our species, heading toward the galactic core. Any problems with the mixed crews? None. Human training protocols eliminated most cultural conflicts. The crews are more efficient than anything we achieved before. And the new species contacts? 3 civilizations have accepted integration in the past 6 months. 1 chose to resist. She paused. They changed their minds after seeing what happened to their infrastructure systems. Admiral Kale nodded. He had learned to appreciate human efficiency, even when it meant the end of everything he once believed about independence and equality. The galaxy was at peace again. But this time, it was a peace that would last because only 1 species was strong enough to break it, and that species had no interest in chaos. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy. They had organized it, and in the process, they had made everyone part of something much larger than any of them could have achieved alone. The war was over. The real work of galactic civilization could finally begin.